Okay. All right. I'm recording live with Dr. Ronald Cicurel, and we're going to be discussing reality today, which is everybody's favorite subject. So, Dr. Ronald Cicurel, you were a professor for a while, is that right? In EPFL?
I was a lecturer in EPFL.
Okay. So, yeah.
I was also teaching. I was lecturer. I was professor when I was much younger.
Oh, okay. So you're a professor at a different school, and then just a lecturer at EPFL.
Yes.
And that's how you got into, I think, the Blue Brain project that became the Human Brain Project.
Yes.
I guess that's a more complicated story.
In 2004, I met at EPFL Henry Markham, and he had this crazy idea at the time of building a computer model of the human brain. And I found the idea very interesting. I had a lot of doubts on the possibility to do it, but Henry is a very clever man, and I enjoyed discussing with him. And especially, I wanted to learn more about neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I wanted to learn more about neuroscience. So I studied a little bit of neuroscience with him, and we had long discussions, and I decided to support him and to help him in launching this Blue Brain project. At that time, it was only an idea, and he spoke with IBM, and IBM gave us a sort of support, and that's how it started.
So, your background, you were a mathematician and philosopher. Is that basically your background originally? And you've written a few books now.
Yes, my original background is a mathematician. And I mean, mathematics is also a reason why I joined Henry, because my doubts on the possibility of building a
simulation of the
brain was rather based on mathematics,
right? Which is mainly based on Gödelian information, that you believe that there's certain information unlike Shannon information. So Shannon information
is much later. At that time it was based on only
something
on
more simple,
on theorems, and on the fact that it seems like the brain can do things that the computer cannot do.
Right.
A digital computer is limited basically by the halting problem. There are problems that it cannot solve. It cannot give you an answer, and the brain didn't seem to have those kind of limits. So I was very interested in seeing how people were thinking about that. I had read also Roger Penrose, and the project was very exciting, I must say. The idea of Blue Brain project, and we obtained some financing of the Swiss government, and I had the opportunity with Henry to go all over the world and speak with the various neuroscientists and see what was their opinion and their openness to this kind of approach. Basically, I noticed that most neuroscience believed that the brain was a kind of very sophisticated computer. And that
biomechanical computer, basically.
Biomechanical computer, and that there was absolutely no reason why intelligence couldn't develop in a mechanical form, just as it does in the brain. obviously I had doubts on that subject, but
Right.
I found it very interesting to discuss with people with and to notice that computationalism was the basic widespread theory to approach the brain. Not everybody agreed with this. For instance, some physicists even said that we were losing a lot of time and money by following this this approach.
And
so,
yeah, go ahead.
Yes. No.
Yeah. So I was going to say. So basically, it's from what I've read and are talking before. It seems like it came down to an ideological difference almost. I think you and Miguel call it computationalism, which is almost similar to what we commonly know as materialism, but just put onto everything can be simulated or computed sooner or later, where your view and that of your colleague Miguel Nicolelis is it sounds simple, but it's not that simple, basically. Is that right?
Well, it's based on something that you call the Church-Turing hypothesis.
Yeah, Church-Turing.
Who says that who basically says that everything can be simulated by a computer. There's nothing more to reality than what can be simulated by a computer. And many people have taken this hypothesis, who's a mathematical hypothesis, who's a hypothesis about mathematical formulas, equations, in a physical form, and it became the physical Church-Turing hypothesis, that everything physical could be. But it's not that simple, because a simulation depends on what you observe, what data you collect, and what you don't collect.
Right.
So during this work with Henry, I had the opportunity to meet in 2004, 2005 Miguel Nicolelis, and this was for me a big encounter. I noticed a man who was very, very open and very humanistic also, and had a much broader view than most neuroscientists that I had the opportunity to meet. And by discussing together, we noticed that each one of us had arguments against computationalism that came from different sources. His arguments were basically from biology, and mine were basically from mathematics, mathematics and physics. And we discussed for about 10 years, and we came to the idea that there's a big difference between a mechanism and an organism. There's a big difference between something who has evolved and something who is built. And that not all could be transcribed in channel information, in bits, and in fact, it's something that is very simple, that every one of us knows perfectly. We have feelings that we cannot express. When we express them, we change them. They are transformed by our expression. Our feelings are much larger, have many more dimensions than what we can put into words.
Would you say that feelings can be experienced? So they're empirical, but maybe not objective. So they could be experienced on an individual level, sort of a subjective level. But the problem is you can't really, as soon as you start to describe them, they become something else. And so therefore you can't really program them. If you could somehow describe them and them actually be what that it was originally, you could program them, but because you can't, and it's so subjective and contextual that you can't program it properly. Is that basically
Absolutely.
right? Okay.
I was once at a conference of Schmidt-Huber, who's a AI famous researcher, and a lady asked him exactly that question. You can't program a feeling, and
Right.
his answer was, "Give me a definition of what you feel, and I'll program it for you. It's not a problem." Obviously, it's a little bit intellectually distorted, this
Right.
answer, because the difficulty is precisely to give a definition. And if you can't define something, you cannot program it.
Right.
Defining a feeling is very reductionist. You reduce the feeling to its definition, and in fact, not two people experience the feeling in the same way. It depends on so many other factors that one definition is much too unidimensional. It doesn't give the full amplitude of what we can feel.
Right.
In fact, you can consider that this a little bit historically. There's this sort of primitive. We must not forget that language is, at least structured language, is a recent acquisition.
Right.
It's only between 20 and 100,000 years old, and our brain has evolved for millions of years. So for millions of years, we were not used to, we use symbols or movements or perhaps noises to communicate, but we didn't have a structured language.
Right.
In my book, I give this example of a man in the savannah 100,000 years ago who saw something move, and he doesn't have time to ask himself, is it higher vegetation, herb that I'm seeing, or is it a lion tail? He must decide immediately.
Right.
And he's not deciding by thinking. It's
an emotion.
It's an emotion. It's an emotion. So this emotional part is very important. It's the basic. It's the basic of what we are, the animal that we are. We came up with Miguel with the idea that the brain could not be only a digital computer, that there had to be an analog part in it. And all this emotional part is analog. So we came up with a description of with a theory of the brain who's a dual system where there's an analog part and a digital part that interact permanently one with the other. And also that there's another type of information, not only the digital bits, but also analog information who is physical, who cannot be converted directly to bits.
So this is this what you and Miguel describe as your like scientific dualism? Because basically, for anyone who's listening that doesn't know, there's like the Cartesian dualism that says, you know, animals and vegetation and everything else, it is mechanistic and sort of like a cause and effect, Newtonian view, but us higher animals have something like a spirit or soul. But I think what you and Miguel are kind of getting at in the relativistic brain is that there's more of a scientific dualism in that we sort of live in this verbal world and our thought reaction to what happens in the natural world, including what comes in through our sense information, but also what we feel in our body and just the images that are inside of our brains, our heads. And that can seem dualistic because we're like a dual processor. But it's just the way that our physiology has laid it out. So I don't know if you can clarify your view on that.
Yes, you've been quite clear. I mean, you've explained it quite clearly. We can consider, in fact, the mental space.
Yeah.
The mental space would be the sum of all our representations, perceptions who come from our senses from outside or from inside of us.
Right.
And this mental space has obviously a verbal component, a verbal world, and also an emotional component, a natural world, who's much older and those both those two worlds interact permanently. The verbal world has the same kind of limitations as a computer.
Right.
But when the computer gets stuck and starts circling because it has a bug, it falls on a something equivalent to the halting problem, then we can also always interfere by taking a decision. The decision who's taken from outside. In fact, the natural world acts a little bit as something outside of the formal verbal system, and that makes a big difference. Physically, it happens by constant interaction. Our idea is that internal magnetic fields produced by spikes combine in a sort of analog computation, who's very powerful, and he influence the neural system. Yes, and there's this interaction, this game between both components of the brain, who is permanent.
Now, this is a really interesting area of your theory, the relativistic brain, yours and your colleague Miguel, in that it's similar to Roger Penrose's quantum consciousness. And but I know the distinction is that yours says there could be a quantum element, but that's not necessary, because everything is good enough at the systems level, as long as it includes the interaction with the electromagnetic waves, and but not everyone wants to include the EM waves. But by including the EM waves, that gives sort of your almost like scientific dualism, like sometimes you might call it, not the same as like a spirit or soul, like Cartesian dualism, but this phenomena that's almost like a dualism, because what it is those EM waves happen at like the higher level functions, not just the motor movements, but the interaction between the, I think, natural world and the verbal world. Then that's where there's the electromagnetic interaction, and that sort of produces what seems like another world, almost transcendent, but really it's just the brain's super complex way of interacting that we're barely starting to understand. Yeah, can you clarify some of that complexity? I know it's more of Miguel's scope, who's your colleague on especially the relativistic brain, but I know it's a really interesting area, especially because it's sort of getting into the very popular Roger Penrose theories, but again, I know it's a little bit different.
In fact, Miguel had a PhD student who built a sort of model of this hybrid computer system.
Okay.
With we discovered that a long time ago, HP had also tried to build a model of a dual system, analog and digital. Okay. I find the question rather complicated because there are billions and billions, trillions of interactions every second between. It's a two-way system who is perpetually moving. So I think we're a long way in building a physical model of this this kind of computation, but it has allowed very different things. For instance, all the brain net developments are a little bit based on this idea, how to use this hybrid model in an efficient way. We are far from understanding completely how the brain works, but I think it's a good basic suggestion to consider. It's a hybrid
analog digital. Yeah. So, but what it does though is it produces this phenomena that is our unique consciousness, and the reason that's important is because this is because human life, sentience, human computation, human. Sometimes I'm careful the word conscious, you know, but what the human brain is, it's unique in the universe, and we don't even know how unique it is. We're just beginning to understand these things that we just described, and the reason this is important is because the Human Brain and Blue Brain Project already spent like $1 billion, and you know, that's fine if some people want to do that, but the more that we have the proper understanding and proper paradigm of reality, and starting with our brains and the reality that it builds, the more that we can go towards being successful in our scientific endeavors like this, for starters. So so that's why it's important, I suppose. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Now I want to say the problem when we describe something, we use causality, and the causality is a little bit the optimization system of the verbal part of the mental space. Analogy would be the optimization system for the natural part. By using causality, you always hit the problem of infinite regress. You always hit that, and so in the verbal part, you have blind spots. You have things that you cannot describe because you're always hitting infinite. Like a photo camera can never be on the photo it's taken. So when we think of certain things using causality, first of all, it's very artificial because there's no causality out there.
It's like an observer problem.
It's only a representation problem. We represent things because we need order. Without causality, our brain would be, we would have no possibility to memorize. We would use so much energy for a lot of things. Causality has put some order and has allowed us enormous possibilities. But out there, in something, the thing out there that we don't know, there's no causality.
In nature, everything just is.
They simply happen. They don't even happen. They are. Whatever I say, they are not. By putting them in words, it allows some kind of understanding, but it's not their reality in the Kantian sense. We build it. Right. We build it, and we have, and it's limited because, as I say in my book, a planet doesn't know the Newton laws. It simply moves around the sun. It's not following laws. All our models are even if they describe what happens very precisely, it doesn't happen in the model as it happens out there. It happens differently. It uses a different logic.
Right. So the Newton laws are our abstraction, human abstraction.
David Bohm was speaking about fragmentation. He was very worried about fragmentation. And that's what we do. We decompose the world, what is out there, into pieces. And we study the pieces. But we have no idea if our decomposition is really the only one, the good one, and if it makes sense. But that's the way our brain works. Right. At least the verbal part. And the verbal part is the part who is accessible to computers. And it can be very helpful, very, very powerful, but it's but humans are different than computers. We are something else.
Right. Well, to treat us like computers, it's not that it creates a distorted image, it creates a completely false image. And the more that we do that, the more that we create something false, and not just go the wrong way, but create something false. But go ahead.
Yeah, it's something that really makes me sometimes a little bit excited, because I see those computer scientists using words who apply to humans and using them for computers and giving definition of things. And there are things in humans are sometimes undefinable. We cannot reduce them to words. And by reducing them to words, we fix a new norm. We mechanize human beings. And we adapt to those definitions. And we reduce ourselves to those definitions. And I think that's wrong.
Right. We start to act like biochemical machinery, even though that's not really what we are. We just start to act that way because we treat each other that way.
Yes. Yes.
And that's where the problem comes in that you're addressing.
Before language, always we adapt it to nature. We adapt it to something outside of us. Now, progressively, instead of adapting to nature, we modify nature according to our needs and to what we believe are our needs at a given moment. And then we adapt no more to nature, but we adapt to our own creation. So we create a sort of a vicious circle, a loop where we don't adapt to something who's independent of us and not created by us. We adapt to something that we create ourselves, and that can be very wrong sometimes.
So this is the point. One of the points I wanted to get to, and I know it's maybe a little bit divergent, but it's an interesting topic to me. When I read you talking about this and thought about it from some of our past discussion, is are our creation, and this is maybe a little bit of a philosophical debate that might go back at least decades, maybe centuries or more, but it's like, are our creations unnatural? That probably goes down to how you define it, but you could say they're natural, similar to how things in nature are created. So even animals have a lower level language, even they'll make lower level creations, not like we do, but at least on a lower level, and then they adapt to it. But the thing that makes, I think, our creations in our verbal world seem so unnatural is, like you said at the beginning of this, it's such a new thing in our world, or in evolution. So, language and the verbal world and our creations have only been around for tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, give or take. Almost like if you introduce a certain insect or a certain even rodents to different continents or different countries that they haven't been before, they will seem completely unnatural, artificial, and maybe cause a huge problem in that sort of little ecosphere or biochamber where they're at. So it's sort of a philosophical question of if our creations are a natural extension of our nature, or maybe you could call it human nature, or if it seems toxic and unnatural, or if what the case is, if it's natural or seems unnatural, or what the case is. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, I believe that there's nothing digital out there. There's absolutely nothing digital out there. For something to be digital, you have to have a language. Right. You have to have a code. So you have to have somebody who has built a code and explained the code to somebody else, to something else. In nature, nothing is digital. There's no code. Even when you say DNA is a digital code, we interpret it as digital, but per se, it's not digital. There's nothing digital. To be digital, you have to have a language, and we don't know a structured language.
Would you say that those things are analog?
So everything in nature is analog.
Okay.
Everything in nature is analog. When a human being creates something, we have an idea, then we make a plan, we make a blueprint, we produce a blueprint, who's a digital blueprint, and once we have digitalized it, we print this blueprint into matter to produce it. We transform matter according to the blueprint to produce it. So our creations are digital. They are not analog. Our recent creation, I mean. So in this sense, obviously everything is part of nature, but in this sense, it's something completely new for the universe. What we are doing would never have happened without going through the system of digitalization through the human brain and reprinting into nature, re-encoding into matter. David Dutch, I think, had a very nice example of this. He said, if you take a aerial photo of Manhattan 1,000 years ago, and you take it now, it's two different things. As you see it now, would never have naturally evolved. You had to have human intervention.
Right.
We can immediately recognize when something is a human product because it's gone through this digitalization process. If you go on a desert planet and suddenly you find a box and a mechanical watch inside the box, the forces of nature will never produce this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of, I just started Miguel's latest book, The True Creator of Everything. And he pointed out, like in the introduction or first chapter, a quote from The History of Art, where they say, there is no art, there are only artists. And it's kind of getting at what you're just getting at, which is when we interact even with art, we're really interacting with people. We're actually interacting with mind and created realities. And of course, all the more so with these things that we call science. Like we act like there's science out there, as you say, but really all that we say is science is probably that same in that same category. It's not out there. It's in the mental space, as you would probably put it.
Yes. I really believe that, and the question, the deepest question is for mathematics, because we really have it's a question that most scientists have asked themselves: what is the origin of mathematics? How is it that it applies to so well to describe reality? But there's no mathematics. We produce mathematics.
Right.
We don't know. We would need to meet some extraterrestrial intelligence who has a completely different physiology than we have to understand that that reality can be described, that what is out there can be described completely different, even that mathematics would be completely different.
Yeah. So this is getting into, you mentioned Kant, and I wanted to talk about that at least for a minute. Like Miguel sometimes calls the relativistic brain theory that you guys did sort of like Kant plus, but I sent you the quote from Ayn Rand that's a little bit controversial, because she said the most evil person in the history of mankind is Immanuel Kant. And a lot of people think that's just as simple as, they don't like his theory about we only know, similar to your theory, which is, that we only know what's coming in through sense data and we don't know what we don't know. But what people really don't like about it is that it says we only know what's in the mental space, to use, your language, and we don't really know absolute reality. And people, especially materialists, and especially probably more so computationalists, as you say, really hate that, because they really want to believe that they can get absolute reality. So can you tell us a little bit more about how your theory, probably mostly the relativistic brain, is like Kant plus Immanuel Kant?
Yes. We can measure that data.
Okay.
We can measure data. So to make it simple, we can measure data and represent them by points on a paper. What the brain does is to connect the points, right. And we have all sorts of possibility of drawing curves who go through all those points. Because we have a specific perception, specific physiology, and our brain works in a certain way, certain connections seem to us more natural, more simple, more appropriate than others. And others, we simply don't see them. So that's the little plus on Kant, that we have adapted to something. We have survived up to now. Right. So there's something good and something real in our worldview. It doesn't mean that that it is identical to what is outside, but there's something good about it who works.
Right.
And it's the only thing we have. So we must work with that.
Right, because like I was telling you, I think a little bit before we started recording, to sort of prepare for this, because it's such a broad topic, I did a Clubhouse room earlier today on the same subject to sort of open it up for discussion. And yeah, there's at least a couple people that are all like afraid. No, it's one of those theories that says you can't know reality. And people don't like those theories. But to, I guess, maybe clarify your theory a little bit more, it says we can know a lot about reality, but probably just not everything about reality. But maybe you can clarify that a little bit more.
Yeah. We cannot know the nature of reality out there. We can build it. We can build the reality in which we live. And it's as solid, as good as if it was out there. We have nothing else. Right. We can rely on this. So it's philosophically, we cannot assert that it is what is out there. We cannot know what is out there really, but what we know is good enough for us.
Yeah, it's good enough for survival. We talked about that, I think, a little bit sort of offline or off recording, which is, it sort of gets into pragmatism, which is sometimes controversial, even Darwinian pragmatism, which sort of gets into what you were just talking about, is that a knowledge of reality that at least says that we exist and helps us to keep existing is not a perfect picture of reality, but it's more than enough of a picture of reality. And so we start with that, and then from there we can build out goals that we want to achieve.
Exactly. There's no perfect picture of reality. That's right. We shouldn't even look for it. It doesn't exist. The only thing that does have existence is what we generate. There's a sort of I don't know, I would call it a sort of information field out there. And out of this information, we pick up certain things and build reality out of what we have picked up. But we are not picking up everything. And we guess that we are not picking up everything. And that's why science exists and can progress, because we can pick up more and more and improve what we are doing. But we cannot deeply know how it works. We can describe how it works, predict how it works, but know how it works. We don't know why the planets go around the sun. We don't know. We can describe it very precisely, but the reason we are giving, it's not because of Newton's law or general relativity. We don't know. We must accept that we don't know, but our description is good enough for us. So the only thing that could help us make a big step is meeting other kind of intelligence. They will not know much better than us, but they will have a completely different optic, and they would have survived, so their optic is not bad either.
Well, yeah, sometimes that seems a little not everybody's comfortable with talking about aliens, but what that does very simply is in our current sort of paradigm, maybe, or view of the world, it only includes up to this level of human consciousness, and anything else is only imagined. And the closest we might be able to get to is animal research at this point. But otherwise, and even that's just imaginary. We're just some kind of imagining from certain experiments and whatever. But we don't know what we don't know because we're trapped in our human perceptions. and we have limited capabilities to communicate even with animals, let alone extraterrestrials. But if we were able to communicate with extraterrestrials, then at least we would have a better idea of what we're not seeing. Is that about right?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay.
I would agree.
Sounded like you were gonna add more to that. So what a lot of people were like I said were trying to figure out with the theory is basically that, and again, I had some people come in the room that are just like so against even pragmatism because they want, you know, they want to be able to say that they can figure everything out. But then if you press them, like we did in this conversation earlier, is anything that we call facts is just on a spectrum of fact. So something you might be able to say it has a 99% probability to be a fact and factually true. Other things might be 1% probability to be factual and true, and it's constantly changing and shifting in that spectrum of things that we call facts. We can at least get that far with people who even don't believe in necessarily pragmatism, but to the point of what you brought up in this theory is there's a lot we don't know, but we at least know enough to survive, which we really have to start there, because then we can keep surviving, I guess. Maybe you can clarify that at all. I don't know.
What by using causality, we have limitations. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt on that. So, and because we are using a certain type of brain and a certain type of perception, we can never be sure that what we describe is what is out there. We can measure things and we can agree on a measure, mm-hmm. and we can build on what we have measured, and that's good enough. Mm. The problem many people have is that we absolutely want something, reality, to exist as such. Mm. And perhaps there's nothing that exists as such that we can that we can say we are getting closer and closer to what is. We are simply building more and more extended or deeper concepts, but we are to get closer to a target. This target must exist. I'm not sure this target exists. We're not necessarily getting closer and closer. We are building.
Would you say the closest we can get is emotions, or 1 = 1?
I don't think we can get closer, because to get closer, there must exist something. Right. And we must be able to say, we must have an external point of view saying you're getting closer.
Yeah.
The only thing we can do is build things who are pragmatically more useful, more powerful, more survival, who bring us more capacity of survival. But we cannot say we are getting closer to a given target, because we cannot even recognize the target.
Well, yes, and pragmatically maybe is the key thing, because if we pragmatically figure out what we want out of things, like we want a better, although the problem is once we solve problems with science and technology, often we'll create new problems. And so that's the difficulty that we deal with. And so all we can do is say we've fixed those problems, and then immediately go to try to figure out what the new problems have been caused are, just so we can try to fix those problems, but then that goes on almost infinitely.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a little bit our curse, how do you say? We are condemned to do that.
Right, right.
It's a sort of a myth de Sisyphe. We
Yeah.
have to roll the ball up the mountain, and then it falls on the other side each time. But
Yeah.
what I wanted to say is that the danger is to build technology for the sake of technology.
Right.
We should be much. What do we really want? How do we imagine the human being in 100 years, in 1,000 years, in 1,000,000 years? Well, where do we want to go? We shouldn't only build because it is possible to build it.
Right.
I think that would be the circular mistake we were speaking of before. It's not only immediate consideration that must guide our route.
Right. Well, and then we have to think of time as a whole, and we also have to think about other people, and all these things get where we've really gotten ourselves in this trap is economically, because in the past, when we were more hunter-gatherers, or even in an agricultural society, it was just about having a good agricultural harvest. But now we're in a place economically where we've had enough agricultural technology. We're okay in that area, but to make sure we don't have any economic collapse at this point, which of course the economy is just in the mental space, but to make sure that mental space economy doesn't collapse, we have to keep innovating. And so we're kind of like a heroin addict needing to find more innovations at this point, because we don't just need to have grow a lot of corn and have healthy cattle like we did for thousands of years, but we have to innovate. And if we don't, this economy and our mental space will collapse. Yeah, and so that's where we're really stuck.
Absolutely. Because we have built this system with interest, and the only solution to pay the interest is growth. So we're a little bit trapped. I don't know how we will get out of there. It's I cannot see any solution. But we are building layers of abstraction, one over the other.
Right.
And that means we are not living anymore in this reality that comes from outside. That we are living more and more in realities that are our own creations, and our only solution is to build another layer and another layer and another layer. And I must say, I'm very skeptical of this metaverse that they are trying to launch.
That's one thing I wanted to mention too, because we haven't talked about that, and it's not really mentioned, I think, in your writings directly, because it's sort of new. But we shared a little bit on social media about your concerns for the metaverse. So can you tell us more specifically what because you're very pessimistic about this metaverse stuff. So tell us about your concerns with the metaverse.
Well, I hope people will enjoy it, and that it will be something interesting. But my concern is that why do we need this? Is it the right direction to go? What are we building inside the human brain? What are we developing inside the human brain? Are we losing more and more contact with the outside reality, with what is outside, and are we becoming more and more dependent of things of centralized of a centralized control. I don't know. But I really think that before running into this, we should give it a deep thought. And obviously, it's becoming possible, and we are only building it because it's becoming possible and economically interesting for certain people. But is it the way we see human beings in 1,000 years? Is it what we want to become? I don't know. Perhaps I'm a little bit old.
It sounds like your concern is the more that it's similar to the concern with just even using the internet and technology and phones so much, where we get worse, where people, the more we use technology, the more bad we are at discerning reality. Like sometimes people give the example of fake news and not knowing what's real from what's not real, because we've kind of lost, we look at our screens, our phones and our computers like they're going to tell us what's real, when it's the natural world that tells us what's real, if anything, or it's our bodies and our emotions, but we're becoming detached from that, and all the more so in a metaverse. So So is that what you think is the big concern, is that we'll get worse and worse at discerning reality?
Also, it's a limited world because it's a computer world, so it uses the verbal system. So it's a limited world. There's nothing to discover that somebody else has not already built. It's built in.
I mean, do you think that people are?
I'm sure it will be successsul, but I'm skeptical on what human beings are becoming. I don't know if what problems are we really solving? What pleasure are we really getting? Is it what I notice everywhere is that when people reach a certain point of stress, they need to go out and look at trees and look at nature and go swimming and play football and do things who involve our body.
Natural world.
Natural world. You can learn by description. You can learn verbal things by description, but you can also learn by acquaintance. And there are things that you can only learn by acquaintance. Riding a bike, playing tennis, I don't know, speaking to a tree, whatever you can imagine, you can only learn it by acquaintance. And if you limit yourself to things that you can learn verbally, who have gone through a verbal system or for a computer, then you're mechanizing yourself. You're not completely human, because our basis is emotional. It's not the verbal layer comes above. It's not the basic layer.
Well, right, and it seems like whether it's a virtual reality or just technology in general, people seem to use it as an escape from their day-to-day reality. And when they do so, when they go to their escape, whether it's a game or just going on social media for too long or whatever, they escape and they come back to the natural world or to their life with more anxiety than they had when they escaped, compared to, like you said, going into the natural world of nature and actually interacting with humans on a empathetic level that will recharge and rejuvenate people. But that only happens in the natural world. And the more we disassociate from the natural world, the more it lends itself to pathology even. But so is that your primary concern with technology now and the metaverse, is that it's just it makes us less human.
In one sense, I'm a fan of technology. I love technological objects, and I'm always curious to development. But we should consider them as tools for something that we want to reach, or we want to accomplish, or we desire. They're only tools to get there. They are not the goal.
Right.
They are not. Yeah, I'm concerned that we are, but perhaps it's just a nursing period. We need to. This digital world is very recent, so we need to adapt it to. We need a nursing period, perhaps, and well, I see this picture of June behind.
Yeah.
I think Frank Herbert must have had the same opinion. In 10,000 years.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it sounds like you've read the Frank Herbert's books. The Dune books. Yeah. So
when Dune came out, it was a big event in my life. I had it was on my how do you say table near the bed for at least 10 years.
Oh wow! Wow.
So I was a very fan of Dune.
Well, it's interesting because, like you said, it kind of gets to our the topic we're on, and that's what Frank Herbert saw, because other sci-fi projects like Star Wars or Star Trek, for example, they just say everything's going to be a wonderful future because people are nice, right? And we're only going to use technology for good stuff and to make the world a better place. And that's kind of a fantasy. So his big thing was that technology is, there's nothing wrong with technology. The problem with technology is a few people are the ones in control of it. So it's not like you just give everybody a hammer or an axe, or give everybody random tools to use for themselves. The problem with technology is it puts the main power of the technology, especially at this level, like we're talking about, in the hands of a few people like Mark Zuckerberg. And they can use it to manipulate us to do whatever that they want, regardless of if it makes us better people or not. And so in the Dune saga, it took away people's humanity, and that came before the Frank Herbert story in the books. But because of that, they wanted to get away from technology so they could be human again. And hopefully, to the point of this conversation, we don't lose our humanity before we destroy technology, and we don't end up like in the Dune story. Hopefully that doesn't happen.
Hopefully. I just had a word I want to say, coming back to our conversation. What do we call existence? What does it mean to exist? Because this is the basic point. When we say something exists, what do we mean by that? Because there are many levels of existence. When you are in the metaverse, there's something who exists also. Before, in physics, you had the notion of an observable, something that you can measure, touch, and it has existence because you can measure or touch it or see it or whatever. Then we realized that we must give the word, the possibility to exist to things that we cannot measure or cannot see or touch because they are too small or too backwards in the past. So now physicists tend to consider that something exists because it is useful to explain something that we can observe. So it's a secondary level of existence. And by this definition, you see exactly how the brain interferes. We consider that something exists if it's useful to create our equations that explain something else.
So we decide what exists.
So we decide we decide. The brain is involved more and more in the former notion of objectivity. So before we used to, and that's what brain-centric proposes. We used to find the causes of every event outside. Something outside is produced by something else outside. And the proposal is that we should broaden our perspective and look for causes also within our own brain, in our method of perception. So we can never exclude the observer of any observation.
So yeah, that gets to a good point, that it's not like it's not just your opinion, this brain-centric idea. It's just the reality that we're stuck with because of our limited filter that our biophysiology gives us. And because of the way that our brain is, it says what exists and what doesn't exist.
Correct, but I don't like the idea that because of our filter, because we don't, perhaps there's nothing like that. We are not filtering anything. We are building it. And it's the only thing that we will ever have. There's no hope to know something else. It's perhaps, so we are not filtering something. We are building something.
You're right, because
so you were speaking about this little plus that Miguel was putting in.
Kant plus.
Yeah, it's not. It's different than Kant.
Right, because Kant didn't say that we were building our reality. He just said that it is sort of a filter view of Immanuel Kant. It's just that because what we're taking in through our sense data, we don't know what we're not taking. We only can take in things through our sense data, and we don't know what we're not taking in through our sense data. But I guess the plus is what actually happens is we build things in our mental space. But is it that some things are built by others and some things are sort of built naturally in us, whether that's a genetic memory or what? So it seems like it comes in through sense data and we build it, but there's also some that's kind of like naturally already built or naturally emerges. So are you kind of taking those both into consideration, and as they come together, that builds the mental space that each of us builds?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we don't know what we're not building. is the big problem.
I don't know if you, I had read when I was 30 years old, this book of Alfred Korzybski. I don't know if you read that.
I don't think so. I think you mentioned it, but
it was named Science and Sanity. He wrote it in 1933, and the only thing that remains public on his work is the expression, "The map is not the territory." In fact, I realize that it has inspired me and influenced me quite a lot during my life. Whatever you describe is your description. It's nothing more than your description.
But well, also for the brain-centric or relativistic brain view, and especially that this is a good distinction to make, I think, important, that it's not just filters, it's a mental space that we build. We build our mental space and we live in it. So it's like we're living in the map, but we don't know what's not, we don't know what's not included in the map. We just know that this is a good enough map to survive.
Yes.
That basically it.
Yeah. You could say we are living in the map, but this map is our hill territory.
Right. We just don't, well, it's our real territory, but
it's not the real territory.
It's not the real territory. There we go. Yeah, okay.
Because perhaps there's no real territory. There's something, but not something that you can call the real theory. Because for another type of brain construction, he will see something else. So who's not more absolutely, there's no absolute. It's all relative to the structure of our own brain.
So this brings to mind another important thing that comes up a lot in these kind of discussions, which is simulation theory. Not simulation theory like the Human Brain Project, but simulation theory. Like, how do we know that we're not living in a simulation? What is the relativistic brain or your theory on how that we know we're not in a simulation, or what do you say about that?
What do you mean by simulation? You mean somebody else has built a simulation?
Right.
And,
so the way this comes up in conversation, sometimes it uses the example of the movie The Matrix or the novel. Well, I guess it's not the same, Neuromancer, but the idea that we could be living in a computer program or computer simulation, and there is no physical reality other than what this sort of maybe computer isn't necessarily the right term for it, but it's not just this physical reality, it's some kind of simulated reality. What's his name? Elon Musk made this argument famous the last few years because he would say, statistically and probabilistically, if you assume a universe could potentially be millions and billions and even trillions of years old, eventually a civilization would be able to simulate reality.
Yeah, that's Bostrom argument.
And so we might be in a simulated reality, but we might
calculation
not.
Is wrong.
Okay, so that's what we're interested in. What is your calculation?
Because because you could simulations are all related together. There's a relation between, and reality is unique. It's not related to a simulation. It's something different. So you can't put them all together and say it's one probability out of billions. It's a mistake in probability calculation. But what I say to this is that the world we are living in is analog. If it's a simulation, it must be digital. And the world we are living in is obviously analog.
You don't think there could be an analog simulation?
Oh, maybe.
Okay. But so that's the only possibility.
Why would you call it simulation?
Okay, because if it was an analog simulation, it would just be more like what we typically think of reality in terms of nature.
It simply means you're simply saying that there's a God who created this world and we are living in the world created by God.
Okay.
I'm amazed that people like Musk didn't spot out that there's a mistake in the probability calculation of Bostrom. And I had a class, I think 10 years ago, where this problem was discussed.
Okay.
And I asked the question to my students, and I think 9 out of 10 spotted out the mistake in the probability calculation.
So is there How would you describe that mistake in the probability calculation as a mathematician?
All the possibilities are related, so you cannot simply all the possibilities except external reality are all related together. So you can't say it's one, put them in the same bag. Probability is always contextual. You must fix the landscape on which you're working.
Well, because basically that argument, and maybe it's a really bad argument, it's just saying that eventually, if you go into the future far enough, whether that's a million years or something, their probability argument is that eventually we would get good enough at simulating things that we would simulate a reality, and we could, if it was a good enough simulation, we could be in that simulation and not know. But I guess your mathematical argument is that that simulation is unrelated to the other in the equation, so it falls apart. Is that basically it?
Basically, yeah.
Basically. Okay, so well, we've covered a lot. So we even covered existence. So let me see. So yeah, I guess what we're saying is it's a pragmatic view. So would you say your view is like would you put it in the category of what's his name, William James pragmatism, or is your pragmatic view unique from William James pragmatism?
I haven't read William James well enough to answer that question, so I don't know. I believe most people believe that there is an external reality that we can know. What I notice is that whatever we can know comes through our senses, and our senses work by expectations. And out of those expectations and the data we receive, we build something. I have no reason to say that what we build is exactly what is out there. I have reasons to doubt that it's what is out there. So
and I guess the biggest thing is we don't know how wrong we are. It's hard to say if we're 1% wrong or 99% wrong. No,
I wouldn't say that. We are not wrong. We cannot not know how wrong we are because there's no absolute truth. The only thing, we are completely right. We are getting simply better, building more and more. Saying we cannot know how wrong we are is saying that there is something who is not wrong.
I think you muted yourself somehow, or I lost your microphone.
You lost my microphone.
Oh, now you're back. You're back. Okay, for a second I couldn't hear you. So
yeah. No, I was saying that we are not completely wrong, or saying that we are approximating the truth, is accepting that there's an absolute right. There's something who's absolutely right, and we don't know that. Probably there's not. We don't know. So
and I guess the reason this is important is because if we really want there to be an absolute truth and we are going to figure it out, then that can lead to all kinds of problems. Like what are some of the, I guess maybe that's why one thing we should try to get out of this is by having this more true view or less false view, maybe what are some of the, I guess, problems that we avoid or solutions that we find, because that's generally what people are looking for, is why do we want this particular paradigm over the shiny, sparkly, beautiful one, even if it's false?
You're asking about practical usage of the brain-centric paradigm. That's, yeah. I always think that doubt is much more fruitful than answers.
Right.
Precise people who have certitudes are always very frightening to me. I'm afraid to, because it's our nature to doubt. If we believe in absolute truth, if we believe that what we are describing is something absolute, independent of us, then I think we doubt less, and we better. In day-to-day life, it doesn't change, obviously, but human beings are all deep people. We have all of us have deep feelings and deep doubts and deep so in moments in life you always ask yourself certain questions, and you should be open to ask yourself certain questions. If you impose yourself ideas like this is reality, this is true, I think it's a mistake. You should remain open.
Right. So trying to establish absolute truth gives us an absolute fantasy world.
No, trying.
Okay.
We should try. We should try, but believing we can reach it is utopia.
Yeah, utopia. That's a good good distinction. So I guess maybe it's an idea to sort of start to close on is, and I know we already touched on this a little bit, but when you were talking with Miguel about the relativistic brain, I think it has 7 chapters, and you guys were saying if you made an 8th chapter, it'd probably be more about the social issues that come up from the relativistic view versus the mechanistic view, or the computationalist view as opposed to it. So maybe you can say more about the social advantages to the relativistic view compared to the mechanistic view or computationalist view.
Yeah. In fact, probably you haven't seen it because it was in French, but in 2013 I had written a book especially on this this idea that obviously Newton laws work pretty well and are quite precise, and this sort of Newton paradigm has spilled over into fields where it doesn't belong. We can rationalize and mechanize all sorts of domains where there's enough regularities for us to establish laws. But there are domains where there are not enough regularities, and by wanting to establish laws and mechanistic approaches of those things, we are mechanizing human beings, and that's, I think that's a very very dangerous approach. We are not purely mechanical. We have another part, and we should understand that this other part is also very important. For instance, it's important to maintain some artistic activity. It's important to understand that things happen inside our brain, inside our body that we don't understand, but we have to take them into account. Our feelings are important. Social, we have been language because we are not strong animals, we are feeble animals. We need to group together, so we need to communicate together, we need to exchange, and language was an incredible tool to let us exchange. But we are much more than what is expressible by language. When I was younger, I had the chance to meet Pablo Picasso once in in Cannes. Yeah, we was
You have such a long list of important celebrity names. I didn't know about Picasso, and you met J. Krishnamurti and David Bohm years ago. So
yes.
But tell us about meeting Picasso a long time ago.
No, I was perhaps 18 or 19 years old, and we were in vacation with my sister and my mother and father in Cannes, and we stayed at the same hotel where Picasso was staying.
Wow!
And we had always lunch we had always lunch together with him and his wife. I don't remember his, but I remember one thing about him is he was saying, I had this exhibition and there was a journalist there who was looking at my painting and asking me, what did you mean by painting this? What does this painting mean? And so I had a thought and I told him, if I knew what it meant, I wouldn't have painted it. And I thought, I didn't realize at that time that those were clever words, but I thought they are very clever words. There are things, if we express them, we destroy them.
That's really powerful and beautiful. There's some things that they're best left in their symbolic form. You know, I know you're a little bit familiar with Carl Jung, and one of the things that he talked about is that once you fully describe a symbol, it loses its power. And so I think we've kind of done that over the centuries and maybe millennia, is destroy the power in a lot of our symbols. And the only thing that's left is to keep destroying symbols and keep making new ones. But if we're not careful, we forget where it all comes from, which is the natural world. So on that note, any closing thoughts before we let you go?
No, thank you very much for this time spent together. And sorry for my very bad English.
No, you did great.
And I hope we'll have other opportunities to speak. To speak about those subjects, because it's a very old interest of mine. I went into mathematics because of rigor. I sort of needed something that you could really rely on, and but it was a big shock when I saw that, when I realized that it was only a brain construct. It could not be something who's real outside. So thank you so much, and hope we speak
Yeah,
soon.
I guess on that note, Sierra and Katerina and even Cecile, who's a mutual friend of ours,
Yes,
send their warm regards and everything, and they hope at some point, maybe in the coming weeks, we can do another room on Clubhouse to get into some of these areas and have more discussions. So they would love to speak to you again too. So yeah, it's always a pleasure.
take good care, Zach, and see you soon.
All right, thanks a lot.